Good morning, everyone. Happy Wednesday. Welcome to our QDP Refresher on this Wednesday, August 9th. It's great to see all of you. What a great turnout this morning. We are recording, so if you have colleagues that aren't here, we will get this sent out so they can take a look at it or you can refer to it at a later date. We're really excited to meet with you today to go over some of the things from last cohort, and Emily's got a really great presentation created for you. We've got an opportunity for gathering questions, and I'm going to have Melissa talk about that in just a minute. But like I said, before we officially got started, we do have this planned for 3 hours. We may or may not be here for 3 hours, but if it looks like the discussion is, taking a fair amount of time, we'll plan to take a scheduled break in about an hour and 10 minutes or so. But again, if you need to take care of yourself, please go ahead and do that. We have a Jamboard set up that Melissa is going to share in the chat. Maybe once everybody is admitted, we will go ahead and do that. And so that's how we're going to collect questions for today. Emily has, like I said, a great presentation created for you, not just indicator specific, but some process pieces too. And so we're going to be discussing and offering opportunity for questions and answers. We're going to try to collect those on the Jamboard and take time kind of intermittently, but may hold some of the questions until the very end. So if you have a question, I think what we'll do is we'll have you save it on this Jamboard and we can reference that as we go. So Melissa, do you want to just talk to people a little bit about Jamboard? I have a feeling most of you know how to use these and whatnot, but I thought maybe Melissa could just pull it up, share it, show you how it works, and then we'll get going from there.
Sure. We've used Jamboard in the past. In fact, I just created this Jamboard using the last one. So if you're unfamiliar with Jamboard, I'll just give you a few things. So you can go ahead and click on the link so that you have that open. I think I will I won't share my screen, but the best way to put your questions on is to add a sticky note, which on the right hand or the left hand side of the page, it's the fourth icon down is a sticky note. And you can click on that and create yourself a little sticky note so that you can put your questions there, and I will monitor that throughout. Just a note, there are 9 pages, and if you scroll, you can keep scrolling and it'll just add pages. So you can stop at 9, but if we get more pages, then that's fine. But just so you know, there are 9, not 10, 11, or 12, which sometimes we end up with because your scroll button just wants to create more pages for us. So that's all I really have to say. Like I said, we'll use the questions for the presentation. If we can't answer them, or if we need to, provide written follow-up, we will do that so that everyone gets their questions addressed. Great.
Thanks, Melissa. So I'll just share with all of you, we have Melissa and myself and Emily presenting. We also have Kateri with us today for some of the PD questions, and I see lots of PDAs on here, so that's great. Welcome, everybody. We're really excited to have you. And with that, I am going to hand it off to Emily, unless, Emily, there's anything else you want me to address for housekeeping pieces before we get started.
Nope, I think we covered it. Thank you, Katie, and thank you, Melissa. You all might be wondering why I'm in the grand staircase of the Titanic today, and that is because I was going to make a hilariously themed QDP refresher, and then I thought, wow, maybe a sinking ship is not the way to go here. So the furthest I went was this glorious background, and then the name of our presentation today, which is the heart of the indicator. So welcome to the heart of the indicator. So today we are going to go through kind of 4 sections. The presentation itself is pretty brief, but I think it's going to result in some robust conversations at the end. And what we're looking to do is kind of review how some of the things went during the January cohort. We're going to focus on some of the indicators that have caused some confusion and get back to the titular part of the indicators as they were written and intended by DHS. We'll look at a couple of indicators that have some changes for the July 2023 cohort and beyond. And then we'll go ahead and open the floor to any questions. They could be answered today, or they may be answered in the written follow-up, kind of standard the way we usually do things. So let us proceed. So how did it go? The first topic that I have is the missing critical documents. So as we know, we handled the classrooms tab a little bit differently this last cohort. The purpose of this was to make sure that raters had all of the information before starting to review any of the indicators that were submitted with the QDP. And here's how it went. We ended up having 31 total programs that went into awaiting materials specifically for the classroom tabs missing critical documents. And that does seem like a lot. It is a lot compared to what we typically have for awaiting materials. The positives of that is that that really reduced the number of incomplete indicators that we had overall for the cohort. I hope to have some more specific information about which indicators or how many programs actually did go into incomplete and how many did have to resubmit compared to last cohort to discuss with QI and PD, but we don't unfortunately have that data yet. We should be able to collect that over time the next few cohorts since we're tracking this now. The negative side, actually, it's really probably not a negative because it's called to our attention that some process improvements we could do. And that is just that the review of the classrooms tab just may not have been completed prior to submission for these programs. And that resulted in the missing critical documents. But overall, I'm excited to get some feedback on how everyone thought that went. I think I think the numbers show that it definitely improved the reduction of incomplete indicators. We also, along the lines of reviewing the classrooms tab prior to submission, we just want to make sure that we continue this conversation and provide some clarification on what the expectations are with PDAs and coaches when it comes to classrooms tab. So the classrooms tab information is really essential to score the basic requirements. And so it is really important for coaches to check on the alignment of the classroom tab. So that's some of the enrollment information and the classroom information. And I do have a screenshot that I'm going to move on to just to clarify what those pieces are. And then I think Kateri and Melissa might have a little bit of input on this next slide as well. So it's difficult to read, obviously, but I think we're all pretty familiar with the layout of the classrooms tab. So what we as raters are looking for before we determine if critical documents have been, if we have the critical documents, sorry, my light goes off automatically. Okay. So what we're looking for, I've got these sort of color coded here, is we are looking for, you can see up at the top, there's a red circle. That is the number of groups. And we are looking for that number to match the number of classrooms that have been entered down below. So that's one piece that we're looking for. We're also looking, as you can see, there's the blue circle up at the top that shows the age group enrollment. It shows the enrollment numbers by age group. And what we're looking at then down below is to make sure that all of the age groups that are represented up at the top are represented down in one or more of the classrooms. So we just want to make sure that all the age groups are accounted for. This just tells us that we can see for sure that everything is up to date because it aligns. And then we're also looking for, obviously, the lead, all the classrooms to have that lead teacher assigned. And that is what is covered by the yellow. Director is covered as well, just for redaction purposes. So I'm going to mute here for a moment and pass it off to Kateri and Melissa for their input.
Sure, I can start off. Thank you all. Good to see you all. So as far as the PDA expectations go in the classroom tab, I think of this as a joint effort between the coaches and the PDAs. But for the PDA role, what we're really looking at is the number of classrooms matching at the top to the bottom, so the red circles, and then making sure that the lead teachers are listed in each classroom. So PDAs are not expected to look at ages and making sure those match the enrollment numbers or anything like that. It's really good to have coach communication to make sure that that classroom tab is updated if any of the lead teachers change, because that affects the P indicators and the training requirements that the PDAs work with the program. So I'll let Melissa add anything from the coach's end.
Yeah, thanks, Kateri. I think you covered it pretty well. Again, I'll just reiterate that that relationship between coach and PDA and how vital that is for this process, so that you know, when there are changes, when there's turnover, things like that, just that communication is happening, and that goes for any changes with a program, because both roles support the program and want to understand and know what's going on, right? So even if a touch point with a PDA happened months ago, and then there is a change before submitting, just making sure that you're communicating is the ideal. One thing that you mentioned, Kateri, that Emily, I think I have had this question before. We've answered it before, but it has to do with the enrollment numbers and how that relates to the classrooms. And so maybe you could just talk about that in case there's any like confusion still out there about what you look for. Not to put you on the spot, if you need time to think about it, but it's probably like right in here.
I'd be happy to provide some additional clarification, maybe in written form, because there are a few different scenarios that we look at, kind of depending on how many classrooms there are, what kind of program it is.
Sure.
But let's add that to the Jamboard, and we'll follow up with that information.
Sounds good. Sorry.
Oh,
Shouldn't
okay.
have put you on the spot like that.
That's okay.
We do get that question about enrollment numbers and how it relates to the classrooms, and if you're checking that or not. So yep. Thank you, Emily. I'll add that.
Absolutely. Yeah, feel free to add your enrollment related questions to the Jamboard, any classroom related questions, classroom tab related questions. I will just quickly run down what the process is for raters, so everybody is clear on how we flag this, what the time frame looks like, things like that for contacting. So once a rater puts a program into under review status after it's put into submitted, this classroom tab will be looked at right away. That is for programs that submit online. For programs that submit paper QDPs, we do have that as a checkpoint that we look for as soon as we receive that. So it can be caught a little bit different times, depending on whether a program submits on paper or online, but we're still, regardless of the method of submission, we're still going to look at this before we begin the review. And once it is identified that there might be some maybe inconsistent information on this that's going to make it difficult for us to rate it, the raters will put this on a tracker that we have internally for any program that's missing critical documents, move that to awaiting materials status. And there is typically a staff note that is entered at that time with a quick rundown of what is missing. And then additionally, once a week, I review that tracker and I'll send out an email to the coach that is associated with that program. So that happens, again, once a week. So if there can be times when a program might go into awaiting materials, and maybe that's the day that I'm sending out the notices, so they'll get it right away. Maybe it's a few days before I send out the notices. So just being clear about what the process is, and that's why there might be some variation in when there is notification. But it should also be visible in inside the notes of the program. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next slide here. This is another how did it go? And this is related to concerning evidence. We actually had far fewer concerning evidence cases this cohort than we had last, and it did go down also last cohort from the cohort prior. So I think things are becoming clearer in terms of what we're looking for, why we would flag things. But I just want to provide a little bit more clarification about the most common issue that we see when it comes to concerning evidence. There have been questions about why there are certain things that have been flagged, perhaps this cohort, and called out for being used in previous cohorts, but maybe they weren't called out previously. And this can be, it varies from case to case, whether or not basically we catch this. So if a rater typically sees that maybe a date has been changed, like it's been scratched out, or there's been like obviously white out and something's written over it, that would be kind of where they are tipped off to flag that for me. And I may go back and look at older cohorts. And that is typically when we run into the situation, if we do, where programs could be using the same evidence from rating to rating. And as we've discussed in the past, there's plenty of evidence that is appropriate to use over and over again, but not child-specific evidence. And so that is something that we would flag as concerning evidence. And the reason it might not be caught in previous cohorts is because perhaps we didn't see that it was scratched out, or it wasn't scratched out. Maybe it's done just a little bit more sloppily this time. It doesn't mean we are encouraging programs to be better about changing dates, be cleaner about changing dates. We just can only be alerted to this when we see something that's obvious. So this is why there are likely cases where programs have submitted the same thing for multiple cohorts, and maybe we're just finding it now. So it's not a perfect science to find these things, but that is how these things have come up. So just to clarify that. All right, how did it go? Equip goals. So we had a little bit of confusion about equip goals and using those for maybe non-traditionally equip indicators. Just make sure to remember that equip goals have to be assigned to the correct indicator for that to show up in the rating review, because the raters don't go into the equip goals. They just look at what is auto-populating in develop based on what has been, what goals have been assigned to specific indicators. Additionally, if an equip goal is required for a certain indicator, which it is for a couple, we can't accept the paper goals because DHS has determined that that equip goal is required. So it's not a huge issue, but it did come up this cohort, and I just wanted to make sure we addressed that. All right, this is a big one for this last cohort because this was our first cohort back with class observations after the temporary waivers for that started with COVID. As we all know, having been with programs that did not necessarily receive their class observation until toward the end of the cohort or even after the cohort was over, there were a lot of class observations that needed to be done this last cohort. And we anticipate a lot of them being done next cohort, this current cohort rather. So we are still awaiting the uploading of a few of those program summaries to develop with last cohort's class observations. The ratings were issued. We knew that a few of them weren't going to be done until after the cohort, and DHS did allow that programs to go forward with their rating. We're still awaiting the DHS feedback about what the process will be if these programs ultimately don't complete their observation. And I don't have more information on that, but I am going to be meeting with DHS and SEED next month, and we will kind of look at the status, make sure everybody's completed it, and go from there. Also wanted to just make sure to provide clarification about childcare centers that have no preschoolers. When they are rated without that class observation, which is waived if they don't serve the preschoolers, the rating goes through as typically a lower star level than they have earned when it goes into that awaiting print period. And then I have to request that develop manually change that. So it's just a technical piece. If a program is a childcare center, they don't have preschoolers, and we waive that class observation, it's going to show as a lowered score, but that is updated manually. So that's where you're going to see when it goes into a waiting print, it's going to have a different star level than what it'll ultimately receive. And it's just been a while since we've done class observations, so I just wanted to remind everybody of that. Additionally, I think something that maybe I forgot to include in this, but that I definitely wanted to point out about class observations and the work and the load of programs that we have upcoming is that we realize that so we send a preliminary list to SEED of how many programs are participating, how many of them are childcare centers that serve preschoolers, and what star level they're going for. So they kind of have an idea of when they're going to need to get started on these. An issue that we've run into that affected this last cohort's kind of estimation of programs is that we know that programs don't have to choose their target star level when they apply. They can, but it's not required to be entered into develop until the QDPs actually goes into submitted status. So what we would ask just informally is, if possible, we would encourage programs to get that target star level entered as early as possible. It can be changed, which is not a problem upon submission. And it's not a problem for the program. It's not a problem for SEED. But we're just hoping if these target star levels get entered a little bit earlier, we'll have more of a realistic number to submit to SEED, so that hopefully we don't come up against those last minute issues with scheduling like we did this last cohort. Again, I mean, we're looking at the growing numbers every single cohort. So, this is not the only factor, but I think it would probably be helpful if we can get that entered to do so. And then, if it has to be changed, it has to be changed. All right. This slide. So how did it go? Integrity of evidence. A couple of issues arose that we just wanted to discuss. One of them is kind of a general issue, and another one is a little bit more specific. We do have Melissa and Katie who may want to give a little bit of input here as I move on to some examples. The first issue is that we need to make sure that we are keeping with submissions and resubmissions being completed by the program. We are aware that, some programs need more guidance than others, maybe a little bit more intense, I don't want to say hand-holding, that's not the appropriate term, but some folks do need a little bit more than others. But we need to be certain that coaches are not completing resubmission materials for programs on their behalf. So please keep that in mind. And then lesson plans. So we've come across some sample lesson plans that we'll look at one of them here in just a moment, that are specifically written by the publisher to, they're labeled by the publisher as being great evidence to submit for parent aware. We just want to remind everyone that these lesson plans should not be submitted unless they're actually being used by the program. So with that, I am going to hand it over to Melissa, Katie, whichever one of you wants to give your input on this.
Sure, I can go ahead. So Emily has provided a screenshot of a sample that you may be familiar with, or a curriculum that you may be familiar with, which the publisher has chosen to provide sample lessons. And many publishers do offer samples so that programs or people can see what the curriculum looks like, and that's fantastic. It's been recognized that when a program, often when a program identifies that they use 1, 2, 3 Learn as an example, that they always submit the sample. So we would just ask that if a program is using, a tool that has a sample, it's probably likely that they have other lesson plans that are not samples. And so those really should be the ones that are submitted, especially things that don't say sample on them. And I think it's just, if there's a scenario where they don't have, they've ordered it and it hasn't come yet, then there may be some, rationale for using the sample. But again, we're assuming that these practices have been in place for the, in that previous 12 months prior to their rating. And so that, they should have this curriculum well implemented into their program and have access to lesson plans that aren't samples or other materials, other documents. So I guess we'll just use this as our sample and plant that little seed for you so that you can confirm with programs that if they're showing you a sample, you can dive in a little bit more and say, how about let's consider submitting a lesson plan that's not a sample. And I guess that's what I have to say. Katie, I see you're unmuted, so feel free to chime in additionally.
Okay. That was great, Melissa. I don't think I would have anything more to add other than, obviously you can see on the screenshot that the publisher is prompting the program saying, here's one you can include when rating and parent aware. So I think, we don't really have control over all the things that publishers do with their tools or how they promote them, but we would just ask that if you see that somebody is using a sample that you're, having the conversations about, this is great. I'm so glad this publisher provided this for you. And, let's show one that is, your own work and how you demonstrate lesson planning and understand the use of the curriculum as evidence goes. So that's the only thing I was going to add, because I think it's a little bit misleading for a program. I think they see that and say, oh, this is what I need to submit for parent aware, not realizing that, when we get something that says sample all over it, it doesn't really show that they are the ones doing the lesson planning or understand how they're connecting the curriculum to the actual plan. So that's where we see your role coming in. But again, we don't really have control over what publishers choose to do with their tools. So we're just trying to flag one as an example as our sample. And if you have ones that come up, feel free to reach out. We can talk more about it. But this is just one that I think has come up a few times. So we wanted to make sure we caught it today.
To be fair, I think Down on the Farm is part of their lesson plan. And so I can't speak to whether or not the purchased curriculum, what the Down on the Farm lesson plan, if it also has sample, like if it wasn't edited out. So it's not that it won't be accepted per se, because I can't say what their actual produced or purchased tool looks like. So just wanted to add that out there as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Melissa and Katie. I really appreciate that. All right. Another issue that came up this last cohort that I just wanted to make sure we could try to help provide some clarification on is ESIP abbreviations. This one, we still have a lot of flexibility. We are not asking for exact names, but we need to be able to see the relation of a label to its ESIP without interpretation. So, pardon me. I guess a good rule of thumb is just to make sure that the ESIPs have at least one word that's the same in whatever's being written out. So like, for example, physical and movement development, we accept it as physical if it's just, if an activity is just labeled physical, or if it's just labeled movement. But if it's labeled exercise, obviously, logically, that would, you know, come across as the same, but for rating purposes and making sure that the ESIPs are in line, we need to have a little bit more connection with the actual words in the ESIPs. So we'll come back to the labeling, the lesson plans with the ESIPs a little bit more as well in the heart of the indicator section of our presentation today. All right, the next how did it go are incompletes. And just wanted to provide a little bit of clarification that I have, I believe, communicated to some coaches just on a one-on-one basis when I get emails, but just for everybody's knowledge, when a program specific question, so like if there's an incomplete question specifically about a program and their specific feedback, their specific case comes to me, which should also always be through the Zendesk, the support at parentaware.zendesk.com for tracking purposes. The program, I usually put that program into under review to investigate what that question is, to look at the feedback, to look at you know, what the evidence actually looked like. And then what then happens is once that's put back in, if it does go back into incomplete, sometimes we find that it, you know, there may be an issue, it has been met and it does get turned into a met indicator. But if it does go back into incomplete, Develop does automatically reset the clock on that resubmission due date. So this is by going into the case, putting it under review, making sure I make as many notes as possible about the Zendesk ticket, the question that has come through. It's also going to afford programs more time to resubmit if they need to. So just keep that in mind. Obviously, if a question comes through and there's no program mentioned, there might be general questions that can be answered, but without including that program information, I wouldn't know which program to go into, which program to give that additional consideration to. So make sure that's included if you have program specific questions. And also, if a program does go back into incomplete, just be mindful that due dates can exceed the end of the cohort for incompletes. So obviously programs have until those dates to resubmit. We're not going to cancel their rating, but that could result in them not getting their rating in place until after the cohort ends. It's always backdated, so they would still show up on the scholarship list as being rated from, you know, the start of the cohort to that 2-year mark, just like all the other programs. But we want to make sure that you know, we're getting as many of these programs ready to go as we can, you know, for that end of the cohort. All right, so it looks like we are now in the heart of the indicator section of our presentation today. We only have, I believe, 2 indicators that we're really diving deep on today. The first one, I'm going to go over just some general information here about T12, and then we do have some input from Melissa, I believe, about one of our specific tools. So T12, this has been a discussion for a long time. This is the lesson plan that is can be labeled with ESIPs, or it can be accepted based on being a branded approved curriculum. So we just want to make sure that we're getting back to the intention of this indicator. The relying on the branding is a shortcut. It was not originally included in the submit section when the indicator was rolled out. The original intent of this indicator is for educators to identify how their lesson plans integrate and or align with the ESIPs. So it is not assumed that most programs will have that shortcut of branding. If there's not an exact name of the approved curriculum that appears on the list on parentaware.org on every page of the lesson plan, programs need to add those ESIP labels because that is the original intent of this indicator. And we gave special consideration to programs that are already using approved curriculum. But we need to be able to see without a shadow of a doubt that those lesson plans they're submitting actually do fall under that approved curriculum. And that's why we asked for that branding on every single page. With that, I want to pass it off to Melissa. As we did talk as a group about a specific tool that we're seeing some confusion with. And it did come up several times this cohort, and that's my teaching strategy. So Melissa, take it away.
All right, here I am again. So yeah, when we discuss this as a group, this has come up. I know that I've talked to, a lot of you individually about this, and kind of Emily explained the why. So what I just wanted to share was, or talk about why, a little bit more into about why using teaching strategies as an example. So teaching strategies is the publisher, the company that produces creative curriculum and other products. And so the curriculum that is approved for Parent Aware is the creative curriculum in various versions. So when the lesson plan is branded with teaching strategies, that's great. However, it doesn't identify outright that it's the creative curriculum. And so in that case, that's, again, we talk about what the publishers, what the publisher decides to do, and that's how they brand their materials. And so for Parent Aware, to access this shortcut or this little trick, even though it is an approved tool, the labels, the ESIP labels do need to be there. So a couple of different reasons from my work on the curriculum review committee. And so I've kind of seen some of this firsthand. Different publishers often have a suite, they like to call a suite of tools. And so teaching strategies may decide at some point to have another curriculum that has not yet been approved or doesn't meet the approval for Parent Aware. And so in that case, something that's branded as teaching strategies, the tool could be totally different than creative curriculum. So there's kind of a consideration to make. Often we see companies or publishers acquire another brand, and so then things change. And so keeping track of that, auditing that process is not an easy task. And so again, that's where we rely on the ESIPs to just provide the assurance that the whole heart of this indicator is that programs are seeing the alignment. They're seeing that the ESIPs, which is what Minnesota determines to be, the things that are important, are included in their own lesson plans. Okay, so I think that I kind of covered it in a roundabout way. So I do apologize if I wasn't clear, but just reiterating that, publishers may have more than one curriculum or assessment that may or may not be approved. And so just the publisher's branding is not sufficient. It needs to be the name of a tool that is approved for parent aware. If not, you've got an opportunity to work with the program to label their indicators and submit it that way. Right, Katie or Emily, if I missed something.
No,
That was great, Melissa. If people have follow-up questions, let's put them on the Jamboard and we can tackle them at the end.
It'll be awesome.
thank you very much.
Mhm.
All right. Onward. We're moving on to H23B. This one, I think, has been a pain point for all of us at some point, and perhaps it is just continues to be. There has been a lot of confusion on this one. We did have a specific example, this cohort that did provide us with some additional discussion that I want to go over today. But I also just want to get down to, there's my light again. Sorry, you can't tell because I'm in the grand staircase here. But we just want to get back down to the heart of H23B, because I think this one has sort of gone through a lot of different discussions. But getting back down to the intent of the indicator. H23B, as you see in the actual wording of the indicator itself, pardon me, is about sharing information about healthy food. The program needs to show that they provide families with written guidelines on the importance of providing healthy meals and snacks. And then when we look at the submit section, that has been, it was determined that to show what the indicator is asking for, we are looking at least one example that shows how families are provided with written guidelines that explain why providing healthy meals and snacks is important. So we've gotten into a lot of internal discussion and discussion responses to incomplete feedback and things like that about why some evidence meets this indicator and some doesn't, especially when it comes to evidence that might be created by an organization that creates several different pieces of evidence that have been submitted for this. So I'm just going to kind of go down the general thinking of the rating team as we've interpreted this indicator, and then we're going to look at some of those examples. What we're looking for is there are two things we see typically when we get evidence for this indicator. We see guidelines that are written to show how to provide healthy meals and snacks. And then there are written guidelines that tell us why you would want to provide healthy meals and snacks. And we do see examples, as I mentioned, that are created maybe by the same organization that may have both of those things, or they might just have one or the other. And this indicator, when we really drill down to the intent of it, is that we're looking for the why. Why is it important to provide healthy meals and snacks? The idea is to share with families this why, so that programs can kind of impart this knowledge to families that can use this going forward. In the January 2023 cohort, we got a lot of feedback, specifically about MyPlate documentation, which I will go over here in a second with some examples. So we were very flexible with this because we saw a lot more MyPlate evidence, varying MyPlate evidence this cohort, and it wasn't clearly communicated which of these we would accept and which we wouldn't, because we hadn't been able to discuss this quite as in a detailed way. So we were very flexible, but we want to continue our quality improvement, even on the rating side of things, by looking at some specific examples and discussing why some of them ultimately would meet these requirements and maybe some would not. So I'm going to move on to the first example from MyPlate. This is one of many MyPlate pieces of evidence that we have seen. I've got 3 pieces to show you here. They have far more than that. But this is a piece of evidence that we've received where you can look at, if you look at the content of this, this is a very good example of how to provide healthy meals and snacks. It shows the breakdown of the plate. It gives some information on like how much to put on your plate, portion size. So this is definitely how. The next example is another really common one that we see. And again, I'm just looking at these individual pages themselves when I'm going through these hows and whys. For this has a lot of information. Again, it's got food group, it's got portion size, it has some tips on, getting kids to eat. It's got some guidelines on, cutting up food so there's no choking. There are some references here to meals and snack patterns. This is a great example, again, of how to provide healthy meals and snacks. This can be used by, could be used by programs, it could be used by families to provide healthy meals and snacks. But again, this is the how. The third example here is an example of one of the MyPlate documents that actually does include both the how and the why. And the why is what we're looking for here. So as you can see down here at the, toward the bottom, we have information on these are the simple tips on getting more veggies and whole grains into the diet. So again, this is a great how. Up here at the top, you can see there's this specific paragraph that starts with, a healthy eating routine can help boost your health now and in the years to come. Think about how your food choices come together over the course of your day or week to help you create a healthy eating routine. So right there, just this one sentence, it's very simple. Just they're saying a healthy eating routine can help boost your health now and in the years to come. That's a why. Like, why would we want to follow these guidelines? So we are flush with guidelines and guideline documentation that explains the how, but you'll want to just be mindful of helping programs to identify the difference between hows and whys, and making sure that they understand that when they're submitting this evidence, we are looking for them to be communicating to families, why are these guidelines in place? And it, as you can see by this example, it doesn't have to be, long, extensive. It just has to somehow explain why they would, families would want to provide healthy meals and snacks. So I know we might have some questions on that. Let's add those to the Jamboard if we do, and we can address that going forward. So this is to say that going forward, specifically with MyPlate and any other organization or tool that might produce multiple different pieces of literature, we are really going to be trying to look for that why. Okay, we are now moving on to any new changes that might be coming up with the July 2023 cohort. And I think it's important to point out that the reason that we sent out a communication a few weeks ago that just pretty informally just asked that, QDPs or submissions not be sent before the QDP refresher is for multiple reasons. And we just wanted to make sure we're being very clear about that and why we're asking for that. So thinking about the cohort model, cohorts overlap. The previous cohort ends one day, and then the very next day the new cohort starts. If you think about the raters and what the raters are doing, we are wrapping up the end of the cohorts all the way up till the very end, and sometimes even beyond when you take into account reconsiderations and things like that. So the only time for the raters to review notes about, what worked, what did we get feedback about, what are some trends and some concerns, things that might need to be updated is after the new cohort starts. We take that information. Additionally, we go and we discuss that with our colleagues in PD and in QI. We have discussions about things that did work, didn't work. You know, we look at the indicators. And then if things are determined to need updates for more quality assurances on our end, we typically have to then go through the process of, updating our flowcharts internally. We may have to update language in develop based on perhaps some QDP reviews that we've done previously. There could be forms revisions and things. And when we send those updates to develop, it usually takes a few weeks. They have to update those. They have to test it. We test it, make sure that everything is correct. And so really what that comes down to is we can't guarantee that all of the updates and changes that we want to communicate to you all are going to be, completed, cogent, ready to communicate until at least a few weeks into the new cohort. So that's why we've tried to establish that this QDP refresher is going to be the time that we can communicate any new submission requirements. So submitting before this would likely result in some incomplete indicators. If those indicators are included in this communication, if there are any updates to it. So this is why we have asked that we just wait until after the QDP refresher to do submissions. I do know that there have already been some submissions online and by paper. So we just ask that you be mindful that these will potentially result in some incompletes that may not have been there had the programs waited until after QDP refresher guidance. But an incomplete is not a no rating. It just for those programs that have submitted before today, just be prepared to maybe have to do a little bit of extra discussion when resubmitting potential incompletes if they do relate to anything that we're presenting as a change today. Okay, this one, Kateri is going to give us a little input on this one. This was something that was updated in the policy manual for this round, and this is about the CDA look back and the timing of that. So I'm going to go ahead and pass that over to Kateri.
Sure. Thanks, Emily. So this was just a slight language and therefore process change on what date the CDA expiration date would be looking at. So the previous language had a 3-year look back for the initial CDA to count for training as being the QDP submission due date. And we changed that to align with our regular training 5-year look back to the start of the cohort date. So that will be effective for this cohort moving forward. And if PDAs have specific questions about any of this process change or training reviews, please feel free to reach out to me directly.
Thanks, Kateri. All right. Now we have a biggie. We have our 1-1. Another one that has been the subject of much discussion in the past. And we are sort of getting down to the heart of the indicator with this slide as well, but I wanted to include it all in one place. So as you have seen, if you have looked at the most recent updates to the QDP, this indicator is now requiring both an example and a written description. We want to make sure that we are going back to, here we go. So here's just a quick look at that. I want to go back now. Sorry, I need to read what I wrote, but we'll look at the submission and the indicator here in a moment. This indicator has, we've found on the rating team, we think this indicator has sort of morphed into the unofficial enrollment form indicator. We see that probably as our most common piece of evidence that is submitted for this indicator. And that resulted eventually in additional considerations being taken, for programs that haven't enrolled children in the last 12 months, being able to submit a blank document and a note saying that. But we looked back at the indicator, and we really want to stress that enrollment forms are not the only type of documentation that can be submitted for this indicator. This indicator, the real heart of this indicator, is programs have conversations to learn about each child's family and then we have this list. So this is about conversations. It just happens to be an indicator that at this point does require an example. And if we found that doesn't always translate in a logical way to show an example of a conversation, we understand that can be difficult for a program to show. But we do want to try to get back down to the heart of showing the conversation. And so enrollment forms do not need to be the only type of evidence we're seeing, because we still need to see that whatever it is that's being submitted is a practice that represents something that has happened within the 12 months immediately preceding the QDP due date. So that being said, enrollment forms still could be submitted, absolutely. Like all the other evidence, it also needs to have a written description, and we'll look at that, more information about that written description here in a second. And we do realize there still could be blank forms that are submitted, depending on the type of form it is. But we still need to be sure, and this is probably going to be much more in coaches' purview, having just the conversation with the program, just to reiterate. Let's make sure that what you're presenting here is representative of something that has happened in the 12 months immediately preceding the QDP due date. And that written description, the reason we've added that in is to help explain how it's being used on a regular basis, to have that required conversation. So let's get back to focusing on the conversation rather than just saying, okay, here's my enrollment form, but I haven't had any new families in the last 12 months. Let's try to think of some other ways to show that, because the point is these conversations should be ongoing. Even if a child enrolled 2 years ago, the conversations need to continue to happen during the length of that child's enrollment. So I want to know if Katie or Melissa have any input on this. I'm going to just click over to the actual indicator and the way it looks now in the QDP, but if you have any input, I'd welcome that.
Thanks, Emily. Yeah, this is one that we made this change to. I think we've wrestled this one since we carried it over in a modified way from the old QDP about, how are you engaging with families? And I appreciate the direction and the focus we're trying to have today on, like, instead of picking apart and landing on one piece that might meet the whole thing, there might be smaller things, more informal things that programs are doing that might not even be readily recognizable as meeting this indicator. So the example, we were talking the other day, the example I said, well, if I'm a teacher and, a child just came back from vacation with their grandparents, I might ask, like, how did that go? Tell me about, what you learned, and talk with the parents about, what they did. And then, could there be an activity around that or a follow-up to that? And you showcase that conversation as engaging with families to learn about who they are, where they come from, their preferences, that kind of thing. So it's trying to get to, like, not just a formal piece of paper or document. Like, I know we're really kind of honed in on this document-based system, and we get a little bit boxed in by that. But maybe trying to think outside of that and say, you know, in your everyday practices, you know, what are you talking to families about when they come to pick up? And that might not be something that you can tangibly say, but you could turn it into an activity the next day, or so and so came back from vacation in Washington and here's what they brought with them, and just trying to work it into that best practice on a day-to-day basis. Again, this is a 1-star level indicator. It's pretty, I think it's meant to be more basic and streamlined than we've created it to be. If I can just be honest and say that, I think, you know, we're trying to fit sometimes square pegs into round holes and making it too complicated. And I think as coaches, you know what these programs are doing, you know how they're engaging with their families every day. They're exchanging emails about how things are going. They're exchanging, you know, daily notes about how things are going. Some of those might be great opportunities to say, yep, this is how you're talking with families about their routines and their preferences and all of that. So I think, Emily, you know, you did a great job of just trying to get, you know, away from one specific enrollment form where maybe all 5 of these bullet points are covered, and that's great. But what are the other day-to-day things that might also be happening? So I hope that helps.
That's great. Yeah, I also want to be really just be really honest here, and I need to give a shout out to the coaches that worked with me and suggested this written description, because that really was pivotal in how we looked at this. And you may or may not know that I worked with a group of coaches to think through some of the forms, and we, you know, they shared ideas and a lot of really great feedback. And so this came directly from that work group. And so I do want to just give that group a shout out, and I appreciate all the work that you committed to. I appreciate my teammates on the rating team who took that feedback that I shared and worked with us to create something that seemed a little bit more meaningful. And we, as Katie and Emily said, we acknowledge that it's hard to, this one, you know, getting an example can be tricky, right? Because conversations don't always happen in a paper form. One thing that I wanted to add is that, you know, when we think outside the box a little bit about how communication happens, you know, these, you know, an example, so your example, or the program's example, I should say, wouldn't have to necessarily come on the same page, if that makes sense. So if you have one conversation about, you know, maybe you invite families to share about their culture, you know, and what they consider important to them, or you have some another way, you know, things can be paired up. It doesn't have to be a list form. Like we ask all of these things at the same time. It's probably not likely in how organic conversation happens. So just keeping that in mind too, that it's not like it has to be one example. You know, the examples that are provided should be conversations that happened, or documents that they've provided, surveys they put out, etc. During that 12 months. So I'll be quiet, but thank you. And thanks again to my people.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that, Melissa. That is correct. We aren't going to require that one example it doesn't have to have both of the topics. We are, because it's not, maybe not as likely that one example would have 2 of these topics that are listed here as requirements. So the rating team will be accepting multiple documents for this, as long as those 2 topics are covered. And we've got the written description about it. You know, those can be compiled in multiple documents. All right. Our next change should not come as a surprise to anyone, because we have been discussing this for some time. I actually just took this wording directly from a communication that was sent previously by QI. And that is a change to R12. DHS has determined the capacity of the Think Small language line doesn't consistently include written or verbal translation or interpretation services. So going forward, Think Small language access line is not going to be used to meet this indicator. that's kind of redundant here. We've got, but just to reiterate, this is starting this July 2023 cohort. And that is all we have for you today. That went a lot quicker than I thought. I will pass it off to Katie if we want to do any sort of break before questions.
Yeah, I think I'd like us to just maybe take a 5-minute step away, take a minute to add things to the Jamboard. That'll give maybe Emily, Melissa, Kateri, and I a minute to check the Jamboard, maybe organize our thoughts a little bit. But let's take a little pause. I'm going to pause the recording, come back in 5 minutes, and we'll get started again. Let's take a look at some of the Jamboard questions, and I think for our purposes, it'll be important that we understand exactly what's being asked on each one. So, Melissa or Emily, I don't know if it would be helpful if we just pulled the Jamboard up and went through it. And then, yeah,
Katie,
I agree. To do the
can you
PD discussion first.
Yeah, can you give me just a second? I'm trying to copy and paste each sticky note into
Sure.
the right section. So I need
Absolutely.
just a few minutes, but if we could do the PD questions,
Sure.
maybe we could either do.
How about I'll share my screen with the PD one posted, and then let me go get there. And then we can start with that one. See if this works. Professionalism. There we go. Okay. So here's what we have so far on the professionalism. So I'm going to let I'm going to make sure that Emily and Kateri understand what's being asked here, and if not, ask for clarification from whomever put these post-its on here.
Sure. I can go ahead and get started. I'm going to start with the one on the very left. How critical is it to ensure someone is listed in the licensee/owner or director section of the classroom tab? So I'm going to give my answer, like the best practice answer, I guess. I would always encourage a director to be listed in that section for center programs, just for clarity's sake, to be completely clear and transparent. This isn't part of the question, but I would also, I've been asked this question multiple times about, is it required for a director who's also being listed as a lead teacher to have that employment listed in the employment tab? And I would say Develop allows you to choose the director without them having a lead teacher role listed in the employment tab. But I would strongly encourage them to add that as well. Again, just for complete transparency sake, and to make that a lot easier for the raters to know in their process. So that's my answer for that. But I will let Emily talk about, their process and Develop functionality and basically minimum requirements. But I would encourage, yes, to both listing the director, and if they're being a lead teacher, to also have that listed on the employment tab.
Thanks, Kateri. Yeah, I'm gonna excuse me. In terms of best practice, I agree with what Kateri is saying. On the rating side of things, it is not required to have someone listed on that classrooms tab as the owner or director. What is required is that on the employees tab, anyone that is listed as a director with that title is going to be reviewed for basic requirements. So if there are multiple people, they're going to be reviewed for the basic requirements. But if they have not, if one person has not been added as the owner or director on the classrooms tab, that will not result in an incomplete.
Okay. Thank you, Emily.
Yep, thanks.
I'm going to go to the next blue sticky note first before the yellow one, because I feel like that might need a little more discussion. But the question is, will there be a director/lead teacher credential training offered in the near future? Also, will there be a reduction in cost for providers? So I'm not completely sure on what you mean by a lead teacher credential. Eager to Learn does offer the director's credential online that is approved on the NACCE list and counts for the indicator related to the specialized credential. First Children's Finance also continues to offer their cohorts for both center and family childcare. The business credential for that. With both of those, I'm just going to give a caveat. Both credentials have training associated with them. However, training listed on the learning record only is not sufficient to meet the requirements for this indicator. The person needs to finish the credential and have that shown up on the top part of their learning record in the credentials, endorsements, etc. section. So that's on the QDP side of things. As far as when the next one will be listed or offered, we do have a new Eager to Learn person named Samira in place on our team, and I will check with her to see when the next director's credential is being offered, and I will share that for the notes if I get that answer in time. Otherwise, I will send that answer directly to Katie and Melissa to send out either in a coach update or in a separate email. And as far as cost, I will also find out that information when I find out if and when the next director's credential is being offered. Okay. This next one I feel like may be a little, I might need a little bit more clarification on, or may need to take this offline with whoever asked the question. But the question is, in the last cohort, I had 36% of programs with incompletes in P13A, which is a specialized credential, P13B, Education for Leadership, and P23B, highly qualified. As a PDA, what should I do? So I think this goes back to more of our implementation manual. There is a section in our implementation manual that talks about looking over the learning record to identify eligibility for these professionalism indicators. They do need to be on the learning record before, or as you know, when the QDP is submitted. So my question would be, maybe I think I would need to see like, were they attempting to go for those points specifically and were met as incomplete because they weren't showing up on the learning record? Were they advised that they were going to meet those requirements or not? So I think whoever asked me this, we can have a conversation, or maybe in one of our check-ins this week, about exactly process and how the advising should go for those professionalism indicators to make sure that programs are getting the right information. And we do have forms with to help guide those conversations and checklists and whatnot. So I would really encourage whoever asked this question to reach out to me within the next week. I do have a question in the chat about the Minnesota Child Care Credential counting for P13A, and I believe that's relating to the MNCDA. That was what the MNCDA was called before it was that. So that is a separate program that is not related to that indicator, that provided all of the training hours for a CDA along with portfolio and homework assignments. So that would not count for that specific indicator. But if those trainings were taken within the last 5 years, with the training look back date, then those training hours would show up on that training table and could possibly counted for that. I'm seeing another question in the chat. Melissa, too, do you think you could copy Jennifer's question into the Jamboard just for reference afterwards. And this might be more of an Emily question. If you know a program does not meet those P indicators, oh, maybe this is a statement. They can opt out so that there is not an incomplete. Maybe Emily, you just want to expand or confirm that?
With the P indicators, that's correct. I mean, if they're opting in, we're going to look for whatever the specific credential is. And if it's not there, we're going to give incomplete feedback because it's assumed that they are trying to meet that. But if it is opted out, that would not result in an incomplete. Is that the question?
I was just trying to provide a response
Oh,
to
okay.
that question in the Jamboard. That's what, if I know they don't meet those indicators, then we opt out.
Okay, great, thank you.
But
And
maybe there
Astra
needs to be some collaboration between the PDA and the coach. I know to look for those things, but some coaches might not be looking for those things. So they're just letting them go through without.
Okay, that's good to know. Also, Astra has another comment in the chat. I did not write this question, but I think programs do not completely understand these indicators and they feel they have to click the boxes. I think it is more about teaching programs about opting out. That's a good comment. I will say too, and this goes to something about this green sticky note. PDAs do not go into the QDP. I believe incompletes happen on the P indicators due to the wrong boxes being checked. Is there a way for PDAs to let them know which box to check before submission? So you are correct. PDAs are not expected or required to do anything with the QDP submission. All of their work happens with the programs before that, and we can tell them which P indicators they would be eligible for, but also it is not an expectation or a requirement for them to talk about points. Even though some of these indicators are worth points, there's so many other indicators and categories that have points that it's not fair or right to have them to calculate those points. And that's been iterated before too. So I don't believe that there is an expectation for PDAs to do anything with the QDP and checking boxes and whatnot, but it's more, again, like what Melissa was talking about before, is communication with the coach and the program. Oftentimes coaches are CC'd into certain emails regarding, training reviews, PD plans, and I think P indicators would be another good one to include, just to confirm or deny eligibility for those specific indicators.
I saw another question. It's not on the Jamboard yet, but I believe I saw it pop up in the chat from Michelle about programs still receiving incompletes even when they've opted out. And I just want to clarify, this goes for all indicators. If a program has opted out, if there is anything entered for that indicator, whether it be uploaded documentation, the name of a staff member entered into the evidence text box, or perhaps even if something is coming through because it was assigned to that indicator in the equip goals, we want to err on the side of caution from the rater's perspective. And even though it might have been opted out, if something has been entered there, we want to ask clarification as to whether or not the program really is trying to seek credit for that indicator, because it makes more sense to make sure we are reviewing all the evidence and allowing for programs to submit that evidence and have it reviewed the first time around, rather than just say, okay, well, something's been uploaded or a note has been made or a goal is popping up here, but they opted out, so let's not review it. We found that has resulted in a lot more issues than just asking for clarification through the process of doing an incomplete. So I can't think of a situation where it would be something different than that, where we would mark something incomplete if it's been opted out and there's absolutely nothing there. So that's my explanation of that.
Okay, so I'm seeing another sticky note related to all of this. PDAs do not always update coaches on P indicators, so it is unknown. Then to that, I would say, please work with your PDAs to develop those communication processes about that. The other thing I will say, PDAs still are not notified when incompletes happen. So that's another point of communication for coaches and PDAs to work together, especially if those incompletes are related to training, membership, or any of the P indicators. So just a reminder about that too. Any other PD questions? Okay, well, thank you. You can always reach out to your PDA with questions, and they can bring them to me as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Kateri. Okay, I'm gonna move on to some of the other screens. Melissa, do you want to drive the Jamboard or do you want me to just flip through?
Sure.
Okay,
Yeah,
I'll
why
start
don't,
sharing.
yeah, well, you know what, actually, why don't you share?
Okay.
Then I can monitor the chat as well as making sure like Emily, like I can see when Emily like connecting. That will be great. So let's start with the first, go to the second, yeah, the basic requirements and the missing critical documentation questions. And I think Emily, you'll probably drive most of this. Say use the same word Katie used, but you'll probably lead most of these questions. So you can look through them and decide which ones you want to answer, which ones group together, etc.
Great. I'll go ahead and just start with that first one on the left side there. Asking if there be a way for coaches to be notified when a program gets into awaiting materials. I was not notified and only found out when I noticed a status change and develop. So there shouldn't be too many coaches that weren't notified, but I do know there were a few instances where I got email questions from coaches before that scheduled day when I sent out the notifications. And so I ended up just communicating through the email and not sending that notification because the conversation happened. But so hopefully that was that situation because I am not aware of any programs that got in awaiting materials that I didn't have some sort of communication with the coach or even just an email from the coach saying, hey, I figured it out. So all coaches should be getting those once a week notifications via email. It would come from me through the parent aware inbox. Let's see. Could an email be sent to the coach when the case status is changed, when it is outside of the normal pathway? So I just, is this in regard to a specific situation? I'm curious to know because we have automatic emails for some status updates and not others. So I'd be curious to know more about that.
Look, it's just if you ask the question and you want to unmute and follow up, that would be great. Otherwise, I mean, what I would just say is, current programming for develop is, there's, like Emily said, there's certain statuses that trigger a change or an auto email, sorry, and others that don't. So we have a new process now with awaiting materials. There's no auto email created for that. It's possible in the future that, that could be something that DHS or our teams propose, but at this time, Emily's team is doing this manual process. And so until develop, in order for develop to create an auto email has to be created. And so, that's just a process that when Emily's team implemented this process, they accounted for the notification that doesn't come automatically from Develop. So other changes, you know, if there are specific changes you feel like we need to consider auto emails for, you're free to send that feedback to us. Maybe you just want to email that and explain, you know, kind of your thoughts and why. That would be helpful. Is that okay?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Great. Okay.
Okay, let's see here. Our next one. Oh, go ahead.
I'll just pop in because I was the one who put it there, just kind of asking if generally it could be just a future thing. I understand for now you made that change and you kind of did the interim change, but really whenever there are status changes that are outside the normal, I feel like it would be long-term best practice to just put that on the list of like, hey, could we also have that added to an auto email to the coach? So kind of just putting it there as like as we move forward with these things, like keeping that on the list of putting it in the, please address this on Develop auto emails.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that feedback. That I would agree that it makes sense. It's kind of, I always think about like on your phone, when you get like a notification, like you see a little red bubble or something, right? Even if there was some way that was programmed in to notify us that something changed, check it out. Anyway, okay, thank you, Sherida.
Thank you. Yes, I agree as well. All right, so the next one we have is, I have a program starting new kids in September, submitting for a 1-star. When is the right time for her to update her enrollment in the classroom tab? So we've had a lot of discussion about like the status of the classroom tab throughout the rating process. And what I can speak to on the rating team is just that when we are doing the rating, which can happen anytime, you know, between the due date of the QDP submission and, you know, well into the mid to even closer to the end of a cohort, we're going to be looking at that classrooms tab. So the classrooms tab, you know, needs to be representative of that point in time rating up until the rating is finalized, basically. I think, does that answer the question? That's pretty general, but that's what we are looking for.
It kind of doesn't, because the conflict, and I know we've talked about this in the past about, you know, like not having infants and toddlers for 11 months out of your time that you're supposed to be pulling documentation for, and now all of a sudden 2 weeks before you submit, you have an infant that started care. And so that's just kind of where the hairy part of the, and
yeah, I mean,
do it, what makes sense.
I would say that it kind of depends on what's being submitted. If a program has gathered all of their evidence that falls within the last 12 months, immediately preceding that QDP due date, and it doesn't include that new age group, then you know, it would still make sense to just keep that point in time information on the classrooms tab. But every situation is going to be a little bit different. If evidence does end up getting submitted for a child that would not have been represented on that classrooms tab, that's a great way to just, it's a great opportunity to provide just clarifying information in that evidence text box. You know, saying, I know that our classrooms tab is not showing this child, and that's because, you know, they just enrolled. So here's what we've got. I hope that answers that question. I know that there can be cases that are that we have to sort of sift through, but I always say we're very keen on evidence text box clarification of maybe why evidence is being submitted for someone that's not represented the same way on the classrooms tab.
There's some differences between family child care and center programs with regard to ages served or classrooms, you know, because how you would create a classroom might be different. But if a new classroom opens, or let's say, you know, there is some a little buffer there with the turnover policy, because that would be reflected there, where this new classroom maybe was started. I don't know. I'm just thinking of like if there are significant changes, it's just a little reminder about that new classroom starting.
We
from the start of the cohort.
absolutely take these notes into consideration. All right.
I thought
next-
there was a policy about when a new classroom opens after the start of the parent aware cohort, you don't have to account for that classroom in the rating or in the portfolio. Is that right?
Yeah. I think what Amanda was just proposing is what if it's like 2 weeks before the submission? Is that? And then,
Well, in mine's family childcare, and the child is technically enrolled, like paperwork's been filled out, blah, blah, blah. But the child doesn't start until a couple weeks before submission deadline. And so there's just that like definition of enrollment, and I don't know, it's just, I just kind of wanted to make sure that I was directing my program correctly as to, do we add this new family? Do we just wait until she submits and then adjust her enrollment? Because really none of the evidence is going to apply to this new child anyway, because there's no time to really do a whole lot in that time frame. But
yeah, I mean, if that child was not enrolled in the 12 months preceding that QDP due date, then there's probably not going to be evidence for them necessarily. There could be, there might not be. So it kind of depends on if there's evidence for that child.
so however it aligns with the evidence, basically, is use that as kind of the guideline.
That could be like a general guideline. But again, there are going to be different situations. And again, as Melissa stated, you know, it's also going to be different maybe from a family childcare to a center. Really the best course of action in these exceptions, I guess, or these maybe not so straightforward, would just be communicating, you know, the reality of what has happened with the age groups. If there's been, you know, a last minute change, you know, right before the cohort starts, or maybe there's a change right before submission. And we'll work through those on a case by case basis. We do legitimately take those situations into consideration. We don't just gloss over them and say, well, this doesn't align with the classroom tab, and they never told us why. So, you know, with this amount of programs that we work with and the difference between, you know, one program to the next, you know, we try to streamline things as much as possible, but we do take exceptions into consideration. My light keeps going on. Okay, so let's move on. So we've got a scenario here that's been posed. A family childcare program has 2 infants, 4 preschoolers, and 6 school agers in their program. In their classroom group, they have listed age ranges as infant, toddlers, preschool, and school age. This program takes all ages in their care, but currently they do not have any toddlers. Will this program need to update their basic info? Will they receive the awaiting materials message? Let's see. So we're talking about is what we're talking about, the ages that are listed at the top versus what's listed inside the classrooms? Is that, I think I need just a little bit more clarification on what we're asking here. Maybe this goes with it. Should the classroom tab reflect actual enrollment or license capacity? Is this, I'll leave it open for whoever might want to give follow-up input here.
Sure, Emily, this is Tiffany. I'm an advisor. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is a program that hasn't submitted yet, and I'm just trying to figure out how to advise them with that ages being matched, or how to work with the coach. And my understanding is that for family childcare, the evidence clumps the infants and the toddlers together. So they have infants, but they don't have toddlers. So what should they put for that lower classroom box?
Got it. Well, because so in family childcare, as you said, you know, the infants and toddlers is one age group. So we would advise them to, in that top, they would want to enter whatever the enrollment information is to align with that point in time rating, the 12 months immediately preceding the QDP due date. And then that just needs to be reflected in the classrooms that have been entered. It's a little bit different with family childcare because when we're looking at that, we do tend to say, okay, if they've got infants listed or if they've got toddlers listed, that encompasses the infant toddler group. But it's always a good idea just to make sure that the numbers at the top do actually reflect the numbers that are entered into those classrooms. So if they don't have any toddlers, but they have an infant, they still have the infant toddler age group. But if it says infants at the top and then toddlers are included in the classroom, we would likely just reach out and ask for clarification through that awaiting materials process. Does that make sense? Just because it wouldn't align exactly with the top and the bottom. We just want to get absolutely sure on what we're looking for.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. That helps a lot.
Yeah. Okay. All right, we've got the question, should the classroom tab reflect actual enrollment, license, or license capacity? So I believe, without looking at the tab right this moment, I believe that at the very top of that tab, there is an actual field that asks for license capacity. Is there anyone that can verify that?
I think that's auto filled in from licensing.
Okay.
I don't think that's a field that people can manipulate.
Okay.
I understand.
So that would be where the license capacity would be. What we're looking for being entered in the enrollment would be the actual enrollment in that point in time period for the rating that's being processed.
Okay, so can I clarify something? That was my question. Down in the box, the classroom box, below that point, you have to check mark age groups served. If they're not serving an age group and they don't check it, I was getting incompletes because then I was getting incompletes because they didn't check preschoolers or whatever group they weren't actually serving because they were still licensed for it. You know what I mean? They're licensed for a certain age group, but they're not serving that age group. So, like if there's no infant toddlers being served, then why would that have to be checked on the bottom box?
The raters should never be giving incomplete feedback based on licensing capacity. I would guess that there was some other type of confusion because that has never been a process that we have. It is always reflective of what the current enrollment looks like. Perhaps there was a discrepancy between what was submitted as evidence and what was listed on the classrooms tab. There have been times where even when we review that classrooms tab and we say, okay, up at the top here it says that they serve infant toddler, that is correctly reflected down here in the classroom. We go, okay, let's go ahead and review this, and maybe we get to like the A category and we notice, oh, they've submitted evidence for a preschooler. That doesn't align with what's in the classrooms tab, and that doesn't align with what we've looked at. That would result in an incomplete. But we wouldn't ask for an age group's evidence if they're not listed as having been enrolled on the classrooms tab. So that would be something that would need to be flagged and come to me. But I have not run into that being brought up at this point. I hope that clarifies.
Yeah, Emily, can we just go back to your PowerPoint slide with that screenshot of the classrooms tab, and maybe we can just look at it that way. So I have it zoomed in, hopefully. Okay, hold on, I have too many things going on here. Go away. Yep.
It's awfully blurry, but I think we can sort of get the general idea.
Too many things. Okay, so if I zoom in a little bit more, is that better? Okay, so up here, so this is where license capacity filled in from licensing, and then the program can fill in number of classrooms or groups and number of children enrolled. So here's where they would enter children in these age groups. And then if there's children entered in the toddler age group, you want to see a toddler classroom or toddler group.
Yeah, we
Oh.
want to see them included somewhere down in one of the classrooms.
Okay, so down here, and what you're saying is if they're down here and they're creating classrooms or groups or whatever, and they haven't checked a box that says, yes, this is my infant toddler group, this is my preschool group, or for centers, this is my infant group, my toddler group, my preschool group, then if that contradicts something up above, or if there's evidence submitted and the rating team hasn't seen this listed here, then is that where the confusion is coming in? Sorry, I need to get.
No, I'm thinking at the top, if it says they don't serve any they currently have 0 infant toddlers.
Okay.
Nobody under the age 2. Then at the bottom, does that have to say in the box? Do they have to check infant toddlers?
No, if they're not listed up in the current enrollment numbers, we would want them not to be checked in a
And what if
classroom.
they are? What if that doesn't match? That's
So
what I'm
that's-
asking.
Yeah, when that doesn't match, then that is when we put it into awaiting materials because the classroom tab has a discrepancy in some way. And we want to get clarification whether that has to be the enrollment at the top needs to be amended or the age group within the classroom tab needs to be amended. We just want those things to match. And that's what we want the program to do.
When they originally set up their classroom box down on the bottom, they check serving all the age groups that they're licensed for. But then at the current time when we submit the QDP, if they don't have any infant toddlers and the top says 0, then they're not matching, correct?
Correct.
I don't think anyone pays. I mean, I'm just telling you how it is. I don't think providers pay attention to their lower box, their classroom box, as much when we're doing submissions. So
I get
I
that.
just want to be clear.
Yeah, it's just we have no way of knowing when it comes to age group contingent indicators. We want to be absolutely sure we know which age groups we're looking for. And so that's why we look for those things to be matching so we can be sure that we know.
But and I think some of the wording in develop, it says room capacity. Capacity is different than enrolled.
Well, age ranges is listed inside each classroom.
Okay.
And that's the field that we're looking at rather than capacity.
Okay.
Okay.
Does that answer the question?
I think it's tough because it feels like develop a set up for centers. Right? And if we're going to set up groups for family childcare, it's just not as intuitive, I think, is what I'm hearing and seeing in some chats. Okay. All right. Going back to the Jamboard. Are you ready? Oops. Okay. Here we go. Are we good with this one? Any others on here?
Is there anything else in the chat that would be appropriate for this? All been updated.
Yeah, I'm just noticing Astra's comment about checking the box and how that impacts the ESA options for programs, especially for family childcare programs, to be able to access or have access to the ESA and develop. So, I mean, at this time, it's something we could talk, we have the paper option at this point. Of course, they can use that. But that's something we'd have to work with New World on, I think, to figure out a piece of it.
I'd be curious to know about that. That's
Mhm.
another piece that we should take into consideration. So
Mhm.
let's take that back to our next discussion, QI and PD. It's more of a QI thing, but thank you for that input, because we can certainly consider that and see if that's going to affect anybody adversely with the current process that we have.
Mhm. Yeah, thanks. All right,
Thank you.
so I think we're good to go to a new page.
Great.
So on this, in this category, teaching and relationships, I think I organized them. So I will have Emily take the top 3 questions, or at least start with them, and then I can provide any input. And then I can answer the bottom 2 from my perspective. So
Thanks, Melissa. That's awesome. All right. Pardon me. So first, branded lesson plans. There are some branded lesson plans that are labeled on every other page. If we upload a picture of the book open to both pages, do we still need to label the ESIPs? I'm just going to say, I'm going to be not popular here, but I'm just going to go back to the point of the indicator is to make sure that teachers know that they are, you know, how the lesson plan aligns with the ESIPs. And if we deviate from the process we've put out there in any way, it becomes a very slippery slope. So we're just going to stick with this idea that every page needs to be labeled with that branded lesson plan that matches exactly on the list. And if not, we ask for those labels, because at the heart of it, the ESIPs are the point of this indicator. So no, fortunately. Programs that use mixed age lesson plans that are pre-printed through curriculum not being accepted. Let's elaborate on that. Does that have to do with ESIP labeling? What? I just want to get a little more background on that.
whoever entered that question, if you wouldn't mind providing additional context. If not, or if you don't want to at this point, we can communicate via email, because it's pretty specific to us, you know, a curriculum that is actually on my tracking list. It's gone through some changes, and so if you want to hold on that, that's fine. Otherwise, you can unmute. Right.
I'm happy to take a closer look at that, and we can include that in our post meeting communication, because you know, that's something I'd have to look up as well. So
yes, agreed.
Great. All right. Give details. If an FCC can submit a mixed age lesson plan to be accepted for infant preschool, what are requirements, the adaptation for all activities? Can we elaborate on that? I don't quite understand that one. Again, if you're not comfortable, we can always try to answer this, but I'm not exactly sure what the question is.
Okay. I'm trying to give 7 seconds for someone to find their mute button, because I'm always like, wait, how do I mute myself or unmute myself? So interrupt me if you need to, but I'm guessing this comes because I've received this question before. So what are the things, if a the submit section says that you can submit a lesson plan that includes multiple age groups, but it has to, I'm going to get the words wrong, it has to identify specific age appropriate activities. So with that in mind, can you maybe talk about what exactly you look for when determining if, you know, there's age appropriate activities on the lesson plan?
Sure. So we don't necessarily look at what has been labeled for certain age groups and go, oh, that is or is not age appropriate. We just want to make sure we're seeing a differentiation so that we can identify for each age group that they have activities for all ages.
Thank you. again, person, feel free to follow this up by email if you need to, and we can expand on it as as we need to. Okay. All right, so I will go ahead and take the yellow sticky note on the bottom. Is it the expectation that the coaches need to review every branded lesson plan and go to the website to be sure it is not included on the website as a sample lesson plan? Very simply, no. It's not the expectation. However, we make the assumption that, I guess I would say from my perspective, and when I think about what coaches are doing, you're having these conversations about the curriculum tools that they're using. And so, I guess for me, it comes, as we mentioned before, because a lesson plan says sample, it's not necessarily that the rating team is going to mark that incomplete. That was never stated. This is a coaching piece where we're noticing that each time a certain curriculum tool is submitted, it's a sample lesson plan. That's concerning. And so we would like to, say, we've kind of given you an example. So now you have that information, can say, you want to see this in practice. So if you're only reviewing their QDP evidence and only the one sample or one lesson plan, maybe you want to think about whether or not, you work with the program to see more of what they're using for curriculum. Maybe you're asking to see multiple lesson plans to kind of see how that looks, longer term for them. So I guess that's what I would say there. No, it's not your responsibility. If you have a question, that's what I do. I take those questions and I can look into it if you really feel like you need to, but no, it's not the expectation, nor does it mean that any sample lesson plan will be marked incomplete. So, Emily, do you want to? I am not.
That was succinct.
Okay. I'm not. Nobody ever says I am a succinct person, Emily. So I'm going to take that and run with it. Okay. Hi. I don't know if you could see me or not. Okay. So the next one is, are programs allowed to make copies of creative curriculum paper forms as they are no longer available through the company since it is now all online? Or the current version is online. So yes. The caveat, if that's the tool that they're using and they've purchased, it is still approved. That paper version is still approved. They can't order new. I don't know the details, to be totally honest, but if let's say they purchased, curriculum, and at that time it was all by paper and that's how they use it, and they still do that, the approval doesn't go away when new versions are created. So yes, that is still an accepted version of the tool. So again, we're always asking for, those conversations about integrity and best practice. Is this something, if they're using version 2 and there's version 6, what might have changed in creative curriculum that they might want to consider for their program, whether or not it's guidance has changed or, things like that. So I'll stop there. Katie or Emily? Katie?
I agree with that. And I think I would be willing to bet that the teaching guides that go along with the creative curriculum probably have blank lesson plans in the back of those books. And I think the publisher gives permission for reproduction of those forms. I'm wondering if this question also spills over into the Teaching Strategies Gold assessment, because they used to have a really thick, it was a giant booklet, which was their paper assessment, and that is no longer being made available because it has gone online. So I think I'm wondering if this question spills over also into the assessment tools that are transitioning from paper to online. And I think I would agree with Melissa and support that if that tool is still approved and they have a blank booklet sitting around and they want to make copies of all 65 pages or whatever it is, and that's how they want to do their assessment, it is still approved. So I think it would continue to be accepted. Emily, would you agree with that, or would you not agree with that?
Yes, I agree.
To tag along with that would be the it's not necessarily something that's reviewed, because, and there's very few cases where if they're using this, they also have to be using, the assessment curriculum. There's very few requirements that need to be paired together. However, we are seeing that assessments are aligned or work in tandem with publisher created materials. Of course, they're going to do this, right? They want your money. So, but so far, if there's a requirement that is like that the review committee finds that, yes, this assessment only passes if they're using the curriculum, like it has to be done together, then we will make that clear in our guidance and approved list. So I wanted to throw that out there as a little side note. So Creative Curriculum and Gold may work together. They're new online, but it's not required that submitted in that way. All right. Any other questions in teaching and relationships, that category? Unmute if you want. Okay, moving on. Let's do the assessment just because it pairs with what we were just talking about. And this is pretty specific, but I just want to be transparent that a lot of things are happening with online software or incorporations, partnerships with different platforms, software companies partnering with publishers to produce tools, and sometimes they are incorporated exactly like one for one, and sometimes they are not. And so it will require that the review team takes a look at it, because they need to ensure that the DRDP assessment is incorporated into it. And because of the DRDP and its tie-in with the kindergarten entry profile list, there are additional considerations that need to be made, because there are points that are associated with that indicator or for using a KEP tool, and that comes with some of the ways that KEP assessments are used, which include the reporting features, etc. And so when let's say Brightwheel incorporates, or they make the DRDP measures, they might just populate that into their tool, and the program can check whether or not they're using them. That does not necessarily indicate that they're using it as the KEP assessment. And so the committee understands that there are some challenges with the way that these things are happening, and so that's a goal that we have in the upcoming contract year, to really dive in to some of these software things. So for Brightwheel, at this point, it has not gone through the review committee. I can't guarantee the timing on that. So they will need to, transpose their assessment onto that paper copy. This point for submitting it, that would be my recommendation, I will say, because that's maintaining the integrity to the assessment. So with that said, we can follow up. It's kind of loaded, and I'm sorry, I feel like this puts Emily in a little bit of a position, but that might be something that we need to just dive into a little bit for some guidance in those questions. Oh, this is Emily. This is an Emily question. I know I can answer it, but I want Emily to take this next assessment question.
Yeah, so the question, does an assessment have to be sent in its original form? For example, provide a retyped red leaf assessment word for word onto the standard size paper for ease of use, making copies and being able to see the words better. Could this be submitted and accepted? This is something that I don't know if we've seen this when it relates specifically to assessments. I know we've seen like retyped goals and things, and we can accept different versions of that. But this is a thinker for me because I don't know. We'd have to discuss this as a group if we got this. Obviously, I mean, the submission for identifying the assessments comes in sort of two ways. You identify the assessment in one indicator, and then you show the assessments as kind of a second part to that indicator. I need to think on this. I want to know what your input is on this, Melissa. I just have never seen that happen.
Yeah, we've talked about this and agreed. We haven't, I think the last time we talked, it hadn't been something that you've had to deal with. It does say that it must be from the tool. So again, interpretation, does that mean a program could type it word for word? However, if that's happening, or not is kind of that, it's that, again, we go back to that integrity piece. There's no way if you know, okay. So, Leah's talking, let's go ahead and, we can discuss, you know, further, this. We want to obviously rely on what the evidence and submit section says, and then take into account, you know, any other rationale for doing so.
Yeah, Leah has said that she remembers seeing it once or twice. They submitted an evidence text box note to explain why they did it that way. So yeah, we would consider that when making a decision. I would say we don't have much more than a kind of a better answer for you there, where, you know, if that does happen, we can't guarantee that it would be accepted, but that note is very helpful if we would take that into consideration.
I would advise you to have the program submit what comes with the tool, because that is what is reviewed by the assessment committee, and that is what is approved. We can't guarantee that they don't take out, nor could you if you're just looking at the evidence, you know, that they've uploaded. And you're not going to the tool. Not every assessment tool provides the sample documents. They don't. So without having that, you can't guarantee that they didn't omit in, you know, some of the assessment things that they didn't like or want to assess. So again, it's that integrity piece. And so I would advise for programs to submit what the tool provides. That's, you know, that's how I read the indicator. That's what I would advise. And granted, there's always going to be exceptions, but I would not want to see this discussion being taken as, oh, let's go ahead and rework this and submit it as a practice.
I would say if that happens, at least expect an incomplete asking for clarification. Like, don't be surprised.
I agree, Stacy. I think that's a good point. She's talking about copyright laws, and I think that's also a good point. Sure. So, all right. Okay.
Okay. Where to now? This way?
I think that we don't have any in the health and well-being, so we are into.
Did we skip over something to go
Yeah, we
to
gotta go back to
assessment?
our,
There we go. Relationships with
Right.
families.
yeah, we did. Now
Yes.
we're in our, okay.
All right. So I guess what we will, Emily, I think what we could do here, there's a lot of them. Some of them might be duplicative, or so why don't we just go across the top row here, and we'll just start answering them. Emily, I'll let you take the lead. You can certainly, you know, refer anything to us if you want. And then if it's already been answered, go there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if we're describing conversations, this is related to R11, why do we need a form of documentation the family completes? Why not just a written description? So I think this is this is a legitimate question, and I think we've been asking ourselves this question as well. We also need to consider this is a document-based rating system, and there are some specific requirements for this indicator that have to do with that list of topics that need to be covered, at least 2 of them. And so I can only speculate that in the initial rollout of this, when the submit requirement was documentation, it had to do with being able to identify those topics. We do realize that, this is related to conversations which are not always documented. So we are trying to be mindful of that and to incorporate additional avenues for programs to explain their evidence. But at this time, we still do have to look for some specific checkpoints within that conversation. And so that my guess is that is why this began as a document-based indicator. We welcome the feedback on what we can do going forward to improve that. And let's see how this cohort goes with this, added written description piece. But we are always willing to talk about how well it went, and whether this improved understanding and submission, or if there's feedback after the cohort that it wasn't helpful, then let's talk about that as well. I can only speculate here as to why, to be perfectly honest.
Mm-hmm.
Melissa, Katie, do you have any thoughts on that?
No, I think, if we're just going to be really honest and transparent, you guys are right. This one is, like I said in the chat, vague enough to be complicated. And yes, we're asking people to document a conversation, and we're saying things in this refresher about informal things that could be happening. And so, yeah, I think we're making it very complicated when really we just want to know that everybody is getting to know the families and children that they serve and how they do that. And so, do we need an example? Maybe not. Maybe we just need somebody to say, this is how we do that. These are some things that we do. It happens during assessment time. It happens during sharing of, a communication notebook back and forth with a particular family to get to know them and to get to know how to work with their child. It just, yeah, you're right. This one, for some reason, popped up this cohort, and now we're all like, wow, why did we think of this before? So
I'll just add the list. The list is in the indicator, and again, I wasn't part of the initial process for, many years ago, but an example, is what they had determined would show that, those things, some of those topics from the list, were included, right? Because we know those are not the only things, and there's variations of how you ask that. But, when you think about a written description only saying I talk with my families at conferences and that's how I figure it out, what's, there's some opportunity to kind of see, what kind of, I guess I look at it that way. It's, could there be a simplified way to do this? Sure. An example, I don't think an example is the worst thing in the world. Again, we can take that feedback and note, especially for indicator revisions, what we're looking for, but then again, for the current QDP. That's what I wanted to add.
I think one of the rating team brought this up just when we were having internal discussions about this, but just looking at this from, a standpoint of whether this is a family child care program or a center, this is an important requirement to be parent aware rated. And so, perhaps this was written this way because the intent is to have it become part of a, record keeping, for the program from a business standpoint. They want to document that they're having these conversations to show that they're having best practices. So that could be considered as well. All right, let's move on. We've got a lot of R11 here. I do see an R12. Let's see. Uh-oh, things are changing. see. There's R1 with, okay, where are we moving next here?
Okay, Emily, for you, people are going to add new things, and so I'll kind of move them to the bottom. So for
Okay.
you, and for us to keep track, you just can go along the top.
Okay.
I'll just kind of slide it over just a tiny bit when you've done that one. Okay.
So I'm seeing an example would be nice for R11 part 2. An example here in our presentation, or just an example like the written, is that referring to the written description? I'm confused about that. I'll be honest.
That one, I put it with an example. Is there an example that Parent Aware has of a document that can be used for our, oh, that's our 2 one. My bad. Sorry, I put the wrong 2 things
Oh, that's
together.
okay.
Okay.
That clears things up a little bit.
If you don't want to chime in, it'll be harder to answer the R11 part 2 question. Example of the written description. I don't think that's what my take is. Obviously, that's the program answering the, that sheet that we provide kind of talks about how, what, when, where, why to answer those questions so that it gives the rating team a good picture. That's what I would guide you with. Right, moving on.
All right. Is there an example that Parent Aware has of a document that can be used for R2.1? So this is one that we didn't address today, but there has been a lot of discussion about R2.1. I am not going to say that there's a standard document. I know we get a lot of folks that print screenshots from the website. I'd be curious for your input here, Melissa, on this one.
I think what I'm maybe reading into this a little bit, like, does Parent Aware have a document? Like, if the goal is that we're guiding them to our, our website, this has been asked before. I know certain areas have supported creation of documents. Programs have created their own documents. So I'm wondering if people are asking, like, can Parent Aware just provide a document that can be sent? We have discussed this. Unfortunately, we don't have any, we haven't moved forward on that at this point. So I don't know if I'm answering your question or not, so feel free to let me know. I don't want to lead anyone astray by answering.
I mean, we don't have a standard document that we would distribute for that. We do see the same document sometimes repeatedly, which, is fine, but Amanda, I see your hand is up.
I'm just curious if like the parent toolkit has anything like that that we use for like referrals and stuff, the Parent Aware toolkit. I'm wondering if there's anything in that that would be useful for this indicator. I don't know. It's been a long time since I looked at the toolkit.
Suppose if the program is using the parent toolkit, like, I mean, obviously it's a practice for the program. So we're asking them to submit evidence of their practice. So if they're sharing the parent toolkit and it references.
No, I just meant if there was like a particular document within that toolkit that talks about the Parent Aware website and and how that can be helpful for them. Like, to me, it feels like that would be something that would be in the parent toolkit when we're sharing Parent Aware information. But just like I said, it's been a long time, so I don't know. Somebody can dig that out and see.
Yeah, Amanda, I'll look into that. I'll take a look at it to see. And, with the understanding that the toolkit is meant for parents who are looking for childcare. So I don't know how much a program would say, hey, here's this toolkit if you want to find childcare. But I hear what you're saying. Is there some sort of resource in there that would make sense to be used universally for this particular type of information sharing about supports that are offered?
Correct.
I've asked that in the past as well. Like a piece of marketing, like a marketing material that has information about the website that programs can use. I feel like we're asking them to make their own marketing materials for our website, if that makes sense.
I just haven't really heard it stated that simply. Like, and I don't necessarily see it fully as that, like, but I agree that that could be perceived that way. Diane, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I didn't write this one, but I'm just going back to the previous. An example would be nice for R1.1 part 2. I'm thinking, is that like an example of it? Could it be when, because I work with mainly a lot of home providers, and so they do a interview and ask questions or whatever. Can they just like submit a copy of that? Like, here was my last interview with a family, question, answer that they put together.
Mhm.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Great.
Go ahead, Emily. I think we're
All
ready
right.
to move on.
Okay, so does the form for R11 have to be filled out, or can programs submit a blank copy? I'm going to answer this one along with the one that's over on the right there. Does R11 still require a signature and a date? These kind of go together. So just to preface, previously we had kind of dropped the requirement of a date. So that has already been gone for a while because we've just looked for that signature piece or a place for the signature. And we use that to confirm that a back and forth conversation has been happening. That being said, that also was that was a big component when it came to the blank documentation, where we previously allowed programs to submit an enrollment form saying, you know, I don't have a completed enrollment form because I haven't enrolled any new children in the last 12 months. We were looking for a signature line there so that we would know that when that did happen, that there was actually a conversation going on. The indicator now is going to be a lot more open to seeing different things. And basically, there's not a blanket requirement for a date or a signature. We just want to make sure that we are collaborating with coaches on confirming with the program that regardless of the evidence they're submitting to us for this indicator, you know, if it ends up being like a blank survey or something, just because maybe they send out a survey and they you know all get together and they do the feedback verbally. So you know the program would send us the blank survey, and then in that written description they say, you know, the parents are given this, and then we discuss it at the conferences or something like that, or we discuss it as a group. So there's not going to be like a blanket, it has to have a signature, it has to have a date. We just want to collaborate with coaches so that we are communicating with programs that regardless of what it is, let's verify that this is being done consistently, and that it has happened within the last 12 months immediately preceding the QDP due date. That is how open we're trying to leave it at this point. So I would say, no, there's no blanket requirement, but we want to see documentation and we want a written description, and we want to be able to see at the end of looking at those two things that within the last 12 months, you know, there's been some type of conversation with a family, and it includes these topics. And if we could see those components, it might come to us in a lot of different ways. So that might be clear as mud, but that's what we're trying to work toward. More flexibility, because each program probably does this in a different way. And we want to try to account for that. Hope that helps. All right, I'm leaving room now for more questions, but I think I will move on. Okay, we've got some feedback about this R11 written description. The problem is the written description needs to describe how the document is used. This would be a document and a description of ongoing conversation. Okay. Does this go along with?
Can I clarify? This is my question. This was in response to something that you said at the time, where you said that it could be a description of ongoing conversations that they're having, but the wording says that it needs to describe the document. This is a written description of the document uploaded. So if it's an ongoing conversation they're having weekly, daily, monthly, whatever with the parents, there's no document to go along with that.
And that's where we've identified where there is some improvements probably to be made with this indicator. We've acknowledged that.
I understand that, but we need to know what they need to submit for this cohort, because we're talking to these providers for this cohort. So just for this cohort, not ongoing, because we can revisit it. What are you looking for? Because
we're looking for some sort of documentation and a written description.
Okay, but the written description has to be on the document uploaded.
That's right. It's
Not
to explain how the document is used.
Yes.
It could elaborate on how the document is then used for other activities, other conversations going forward, how it's used as kind of the basis. But it needs to address that particular document.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right.
I'd just like to clarify, because I see that in a couple of comments, like, yes, the evidence does not say, tell us about how you have ongoing conversations. That was our discussion about what would be the preferred practice, right? That it's not a one and done. You provide an enrollment form, bam, done. It's the discussion piece. And so when Emily was referencing that, and when we've had conversations about it, like our team discussed how this is, the desire is that, it's an ongoing process. The evidence is not asking for them to explain their ongoing process. It's asking them to say, I share this enrollment form when they join. And then, if they want to share expanding evidence about how they communicate ongoing with programs or families, that's great. But it's not required. So please, just take that conversation that we're having with that in mind. So it's just that desired practice, right? They're having these continued conversations.
It's to clarify why we are not wanting to see blank enrollment forms with the simple explanation of we haven't enrolled any new children. That's the reason we talk about these ongoing conversations, because this is not the enrollment form indicator. There are other ways that you can show you're having these conversations. So not enrolling a new child should not excuse a program from being able to show how they have had this conversation in the last 12 months, is what we're trying to say. All right, and I see your hand is up.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about this is a 1-star indicator. So we really want to know what you want, because people could get no rating if they get this wrong. So that's kind of the scary part for us as coaches, I think. So I have people, they fill out, they have forms or they have their own, or, and it's like, so you just want them to write on there that they have people fill these out when they start. Is that all you want? I really want to know exactly what's wanted.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a description of how that is used, because we may see forms, or we may see like emails with redacted names. We may see text chains. We may see a whole slew of things, and we just want to know what it is we're looking at. This is to try to avoid incompletes. But at the same time, incompletes are just asking for clarifications. I don't anticipate seeing R11 evidence and not being able to give complete enough feedback to avoid a no rating.
Yeah, I'm sensing the tension and angst around this indicator. Sue has a good comment in the chat about interpretation, and I think that's where in a document-based system with humans doing the evaluation, yes, there's going to be interpretations. What I'm hoping is that, you know, you've heard us say, yes, we acknowledge we could make improvements to this indicator. For this cohort, we're looking for an example. And not to get bogged down in semantics, but an example may not be a formal document. An example might be, like Emily said, an email exchange or a communication notebook or a lesson plan with, you know, an activity on it that says, here, this is what we're going to do, or this is something that we do that encourages conversations between providers, teachers, and children and families. So I'm hoping that we can come to some sort of middle ground on this one, knowing that we're gonna, you know, do our best and understand that the rating team is also going to do their best to receive whatever is submitted, look at it objectively within the confines of what we've talked about today. And if they need to ask for a little bit of clarification and issue an incomplete, it's not a negative. That's the other thing that we, you know, really would like to talk about in terms of how to frame an incomplete. It's not necessarily a negative. I know that it seems that way out there in the field. And I guess I'm saying all this to all of you that are here on this call today to know that, just to say that we hear you. We know that this is concerning. We know that this is crazy making for you working out with programs, especially at a 1-star level. Like, we get it. We get that this one is high stakes. We know that. We're trying our best to just provide as much clarification and get everybody on the same page or close to the same page, so that when you're having conversations about, help me understand what you're doing program to get to know children and families, that you can help them identify practices that they're already doing and convey those in an effective way that makes sense to the rating team. If they need clarification, they'll ask for it. But I'm hoping that this conversation, 1, you feel heard, 2, we're taking this back. We hear all your feedback. We know we can make improvements, but this is where we're at with this one today.
Yeah. All right, I'm a little bit lost here. Let's see, which.
Yeah, so Emily, so the 2 on the far right are really kind of the same thing. Let's see, let's go to that next yellow one. So our very helpful open-ended questions like, how do you feel about kids getting dirty? Or what are your family's thoughts on sensitive topics like death, pet, or family member? Are those things okay?
I can definitely see where the connection about what are your family's thoughts on sensitive topics. That's definitely asking for, let's see, let me pull up. I'm going to pull up do you still have the info queued up here for that indicator? Katie, we can take a look at that list. That list is, I think it can encompass a lot of different things. So, so we've got routines, ways they prefer to communicate with the program, backgrounds and interests, languages spoken in the home, cultures they consider most important to their identity. I would say I'm not sure that the kids getting dirty, that's pretty specific. I'm not sure where that would fit in. We try very hard to try to align these, and we're pretty flexible on that. I would say, asking about how they feel about death. We could probably say that has to do with backgrounds and interests, but I mean, these are 2 very specific questions that have been asked, so I can only speak to those. But we do try to be very, very flexible on this. We have not had a lot of issues not being able to align what we're seeing. Like, we don't waffle on this too much in terms of like saying, okay, here's what they're showing us as the activity, and here's the one it falls under. But sometimes we do have to reach out and say, we're not exactly sure how this relates to one of these topics. So that's how I would kind of score those 2 specific questions, but I can't speak to any more until we see them. Thank you, Katie, for pulling that up. Okay, the words on a regular basis is not indicated as a requirement for the submission. If you're looking for use on a regular basis, it should be identified in the submit box. So again, this kind of goes back to on a regular basis, we're referring to this situation where we got into a place where almost all we were seeing was enrollment forms. And we were seeing an extreme amount of blank enrollment forms with a note saying no children had been enrolled in the last 12 months. And to be honest, we were also seeing that a lot of those programs had infants. So this is an integrity piece. This is part of the discussion about the indicator as a whole. This is not part of the documentation that needs to be submitted. We are simply removing that option of blank enrollment form with a note about 12 months because we want to see evidence that has happened within the 12 months preceding the QDP due date. And we are talking about that as ongoing, regular basis. That's the terminology we're using to describe that and what you would talk to the program about. So it's not part of the submission, it's part of the rationale behind what we're doing. That helps. Enrollment forms can be used if the program has used them in the last 12 months preceding the QDP due date. We're not saying no enrollment forms. We're saying no enrollment forms that are specifically identifying they haven't been used in the last 12 months. And that's what we ended up seeing. We were getting blank enrollment forms and programs were saying we haven't used these because we haven't had any new families enrolled. But Parent Aware relies on a point in time rating and it has to happen within the last 12 months. So we had to examine that and realize that it was not best practice. Diane, I see that your hand is up.
Yeah, I just want to say a positive for the change in R1.1. I think it's much better fitting for home providers because centers do intake forms, but a lot of home providers don't because they don't really need to do that. They don't have multiple staff. And so I know it's new, so we're all kind of like, oh, how do we do this? But I think it's going to be better fitting to get authentic information from home providers versus us kind of gearing them toward a form that, you know, they might want to start using, but maybe not, right? So just wanted to throw that positive in there because I think I know what you're trying to do. I see what you're trying to do.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Diane. All right, let's move on to can home providers write a description of how they collect information for families, or do they need to provide an example of a written form showing info they collected? I think what's being asked here is, can the example basically be a description of how the conversation happened? Is that correct?
Sounds like that.
Okay. So
Can
yeah, I
anyone
can.
confirm? Oh, okay.
Okay. I think that this is going to be something we have to kind of determine as we go. There are going to be situations where, you know, obviously we're looking for an example, not just a written description, but depending on how the program goes about having this conversation, I think we're going to have to be a little bit flexible on what we're seeing as examples. And so the best practice is to document as best as possible how this conversation is happening. Because, you know, what we might be looking at is, you know, written documentation that's going to be included, you know, in that child's file. And that's the example. So I guess if you're just referring to maybe a record keeping as written descriptions that the program uses for themselves, then that probably could be considered a written description, but we want to see how the program is documenting that they've had that. So we're going to be open. I mean, documents have been required for this indicator since the beginning. So the document isn't different. It's just, we have always required the document. It's just, we're looking at it a little bit differently this time, where we are asking for something to show a conversation that has happened in the last 12 months, I guess. All right. R11 is the new written description required, reflected, and developed in the online QDP. Yes, it is. For R11, could the written description be the same as R12 if they're giving examples of other conversations they are having? We have no, we're not going to mark either of those indicators incomplete if the document is the same. If it meets both requirements, then that would be fine. Yeah. If it does meet both requirements. Would it not be easier to create a different indicator about conversations? Are you asking conversations about orientation form? This is confusing to program. So I think we've kind of addressed this, that there's more discussion that can be had on this indicator. And I think there are always ways that we can streamline and improve. At this point, this is the first step we've made in the direction of trying to be more equitable in terms of giving programs that operate differently the same opportunity, and to also make sure that we are holding to the integrity of the program and the point in time rating. So we absolutely are open to having these conversations. And we have established that maybe there is improvement to be had here, but we're baby steps here. All right, will the 1-star indicators go away when licensing? We don't know. We don't know about that. That is information that we don't even know yet. So that's another discussion. The wording states the written description describes the how the document is used. It's not an example of ongoing conversation. I think we discussed this. I think we addressed this already. This is how the document is used. It doesn't have to talk about going forward. Does the written description for R11 have to say that these questions are asked annually and not just at enrollment, so that it is considered ongoing? Again, I think this is more, it has to do with more with the coach and the program discussing how this is used. Because of the new guidelines, basically on this indicator, we are going to, on the rating team, make the assumption that any documentation that is, any example that is sent to us falls within that 12-month time frame. Just like every other indicator, the only time we would question that is if there's something that indicates otherwise, like maybe an old date or something like that, or if in the written description it's actually being said by the program that they haven't used it in a while. But it doesn't have to call that out specifically. That would probably be more part of a coaching discussion, just to make sure that they do understand what is expected from this indicator.
So if I can just chime in, and I just want to add, I read this, I'm hearing, thinking past discussions we've had and concerns about like cookie cutter, like we have to have keywords in our descriptions. No, that is not the case. You don't have to have the word ongoing conversations in your description. So I don't want you to take, that away from this conversation. That was the intent, that those are quality practices. And so then when we bring that to our discussion, again, that's not the rating requirement. You can read the QDP. That's not what's in there. And so I just want to highlight that because I hear the concern. Again, this was a suggestion that was provided to us, you know, in a way to make this make a little more sense and to be a little more, to have some integrity about, you know, what's happening, how can we demonstrate this, move it from just, you know, the enrollment indicator to something else. That's my feeling.
Okay, we did not take a break. We probably should have. I think we're almost done, but take a deep breath, move your arms around, turn your head from side to side, move your body a little bit. Emily, if your light turns off again, just flag it on. Okay, I think we're close. Melissa, right? Anything added? So that's what I'm not going to be able to know is if anybody's popped new things on. So we have these three, and is that it then?
Something might have been added to the assessment page, but
sorry for the scrolling. Oh, those two were both there, I think.
Oh, you're right. You're right. Never mind.
Okay. All right. Let's tackle develop questions and then we'll wrap up. We've got 11 minutes, so I think we're good.
Okay, so could you go over how a program enters a star rating goal? That can be entered during the application, I believe, and that can be entered during the application. It also is entered when a program submits. But I do think, correct me if I'm wrong, at any point when that program is in applied status, they can go in and assign that star level in develop.
My dog agrees.
What? Oh. Okay, Melissa added directions to chat, so it's been answered.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. How does the coach get this new submission due date if it gets reset during an incomplete? This would be visible inside the case. This shows up where it would have shown up previously. And it's 15 days from the date that it goes back into the status, into the new status. So it should be able to be calculated that way, but also it should be just front and center there inside the case when you go into the case info. I've always told programs not to enter anything into the evidence text box. I have them type up a Word document and upload. It's allowed in the evidence text box. We will allow whatever you want in that evidence text box. That is a place for clarification. We just don't use that evidence text box as evidence, which I guess maybe it's a little bit counterintuitive to it being called the evidence text box. Maybe that's some feedback we should give. It is a place for additional notes, and you can put whatever you want in there to explain what it is we're looking at. It is a place to accompany your evidence. That could be, you know, the evidence that's been uploaded. That could be the evidence that is linked through a equip goal, just any, you know, enter notes into there if there's any clarification that needs to be made, or if you're just concerned that there's clarification that needs to be made. Anything else that just came through on chat? I do see the chat continuing to pop up, but.
Doreen asked if now that we've had the QDP refresher and we all have the same information to operate with, if she's saying, is it okay for programs to submit QDPs?
Yes, we just wanted to make sure that we were communicating all of this information to everyone, and giving the opportunity for everyone to get this before submission. But yes, absolutely.
Okay, I just scrolled back through. There's a couple more that landed here on the front page. Melissa, maybe you've seen these already, or should we go through them?
I have seen them. Marketing materials is asked about where do programs that so if they have recently rated, they would have received or they will receive. So after a rating, we provide the list to the communications coordinator, and she provides that information to the, I'm having COVID brain. I literally have COVID right now, you guys. Yeah, sorry, aside. So she provides that to the person who sends the materials, and they create accounts and then send the e-blast, and then the program receives it. If they've rated like cohort ago or 2 cohorts ago and they want something new, they can send an email to marketing kits at Child Care Aware. There's an email, it's on the Parent Aware website, where it talks about how to request new marketing materials if they've lost their login credentials. Otherwise, if they have their login credentials from their last rating, they should be able to enter those credentials into the website and order anything, that they want. They wanted a refresher banner, additional yard signs, etc. Well, there, you can take the other 2 questions.
Yeah, it went away on my screen. I can't see it, the Jamboard. Yeah, I definitely want to address this second one. So this is a general question regarding QDP refreshers. Can we get a commitment to hold these refreshers prior to the beginning of the cohort going forward? Thank you. No, we cannot. And I went into it a little bit in one of my slides, but it's important to understand that because the cohorts are up against each other by 0 days, there's no capacity for the rating team to finish a cohort whilst preparing for a QDP refresher. Additionally, we cannot review what went right and went wrong and the feedback that we got until we have finished the cohort. So there would be nothing to present. So this is probably more of an issue with, examining the structure of our cohort model. But there is no way to do that. There are 5 of us on the rating team. Only 3 of us are staff. And it takes, just the calculation alone, just for your inside knowledge, calculating and putting all of those programs through from ready for rating to awaiting print has to be done manually by me, every single program. It takes about 10 minutes to do each program. And we had 461 programs go through this cohort. So the end of a cohort is the busiest time for us. So there would just not be a way to do that, unfortunately.
So if you're going to chime in, but from my perspective as the person that, generally provides TA for, the QDP, we are able generally to take the information, we do meet to update the QDP, and generally that's completed ahead of the cohort. And so when that's available and you can, take time to go through that, we know that, this cohort, we didn't provide the summary of changes in time for this, especially R11. And I understand and hear how that feels to come to you and to have to discuss it now. So we know that we need to at least provide that and communicate, those major changes ahead of the cohort. And those things can happen. And our team exists to support you, for you to ask questions. When I don't get any questions, I assume that all is well. You've all read the updated QDP, and there are no questions. It makes total sense. That's what we assume when we don't hear from anyone. And so please feel free to reach out, and we'll do our best to answer questions or let you know when those things can happen. So I just want to acknowledge the work that Emily's team has to be done, the work it takes to prepare the refreshers. So when we provide the documents, please do look through and gather questions so that we can support you, in a time frame that works. And I see there's some chat, so we can.
Yeah, there's some good chats. I would just add, I think there is, a level of respect we need to provide to the rating team for their workflow. I also think there's room for some middle ground that we could come to in terms of, working with the rating team as the cohort moves on, providing any updates that we hear about mid-cohort, and a commitment from QI, like Melissa was just saying, to provide, changes and try not to do major changes prior to the start of a cohort that we're not going to talk about until after the start. So I think this, like, I have made lots of reflections and observations about how this policy forms rollout cycle has gone, and am going to look at our team to shore that up a little bit and help you all prepare for the start of cohorts in a little bit better way. So some of that includes the rating team, some of it is strictly QI. So just wanted to acknowledge that and kind of provide that for clarification and comment.
I'm seeing, we have, as Emily mentioned, there's crossover with finalizing ratings. There's a lot, in that, June, beginning of June through the end of the July that happens. Another thing too is with participation agreements, coming in, programs could potentially submit without submitting a participation agreement, and then technically they can't, there's considerations. We've got timing and deadlines that we know that there's, possibly some policy gaps or improvements we can make. And so, of course, we want what's best for you, what's best for programs. We know some people are really eager and some people are like waiting till the very end of the deadline. So there's a wide range that you're dealing with, and we want to support you through all of that. And so, again, I'm here for you to answer any questions you have before we have these refreshers. If we need to rename them, that's fine. Opportunities to gather and talk about the QDP. But anyway, I'll let Katie and Emily, you can close this up as we're at our time.
I just wanted to say thank you, everybody, for giving us this opportunity to make sure we're all on the same page here. I know we tried to get this to you as close to the beginning of the cohort as possible. I know everybody in the system is doing their best. Absolutely.
Thank you, Emily, for putting all of the information together and presenting and allowing time for questions and discussion. We look forward to supporting you as we move along. If anybody has anything that they need, please let us know. We will provide a follow-up notes document with maybe some clarifications, just so it's on paper for everyone, to the questions that were posed and the deeper discussions that we had, and try to just maintain really good communication with all of you. So thank you very much. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I will send out this recording as soon as it's ready to go.